Ow! It hurts so much. Tendinitis. This hurts to do. Hello. If you've been here before, if you know who I am, you might know that I am more or less obsessed with analyzing people, more specifically analyzing how people interact with each other. And this is how I kind of broke my teeth into the commentary space on YouTube a couple years ago. Now, while I am not an expert in this regard in any way, like any sort of mental health expert or anything like that, there was a specialist who works with autistic people. For the record, I'm not sure if I am. I am still pending a diagnosis or assessment, but I am pretty sure that I'm neurodivergent nonetheless. But this specialist suggested to me that perhaps my intense interest around how people work might come from a history of studying people as a means of learning how to mask or kind of assimilate into the communities around me. Growing up, especially growing up in a military environment where I'm moving every couple of years, I had to assimilate a lot. So it makes sense that perhaps this just comes from a long-term history of studying people. Now, when it comes to dating specifically, I have my own struggles around dating, or had when I was dating, specifically around eye contact. That was a really huge one. Anxiety around eating, food pickiness, sit-down meals, things like that. And in general, just really intense, almost debilitating anxiety before every date. Oh, and did I mention small talk? Small talk is so painful for me. And I'm sure there's a variety of other things, other challenges for people who are on the spectrum or otherwise neurodivergent. But these are just the top few that popped into mind that I relate to and that you might relate to. Again, back when I was dating, because I am no longer quote unquote on the market. But when I was dating, I considered myself to be successful at it, in that I always got what I wanted out of the experience. So that means that, if I were dating just for fun, just to kind of keep things light and casual and meet people, that's generally what I got out of dating. When I decided that I was more open to something serious in terms of a relationship, generally that would come along. Or if I just decided that I wanted to focus on me and not involve dating, then I would be successful in that arena as well. And now at this point in time, I am in a long-term relationship that's been ongoing for over 4 years now, but I don't believe that in and of itself qualifies me as somebody who can give good dating and relationship advice. But we're going to get into that a little bit later as I get into these myths. And when it comes to giving dating advice, I've always loved doing that. I love giving advice in general, and that's something that if you've been around for a while, you know that about me. And you may or may not know that I have embarked on a couple of career endeavors centered around dating advice or dating coaching. And just now, as Jake and I finished binging Love on the Spectrum, all 3 seasons on Netflix, oh my gosh, best show ever. Watching Jodie, specifically from Love on the Spectrum, Australia, she's kind of a dating coach to people with disabilities. It kind of reinvigorated that desire in me to do something like what she does long term. Side note, I told her that on her Instagram, and she took it as a huge compliment and wished me well in that endeavor if I do pursue it. So she seems to be as sweet a lady as she appears in the show. But for now, I'm just enjoying giving dating advice whenever the opportunity arises, whether that be in my personal life or here on my YouTube platform to you guys. So if you ever have any questions for me in terms of advice, dating or otherwise, please feel free to shoot me an email, hello@helloleesh.com. If it is dating advice that you're looking for, please make sure to put dating advice in the title so that I can perhaps address your question in an upcoming video or live stream. But for now, I want to discuss what I have deemed to be myths around the experience of dating and romance. So here are the 5 myths of dating. 1. You ruined your chances by being friend zoned. I have a lot of thoughts on the idea of the friend zone, and part of me almost wants to say that the friend zone itself is a myth, and I do believe that in a sense. I don't want to give off the impression that I don't believe that people can be thought of as just friends. So in the sense that I have platonic friends that are in a zone, if you will, where I place my friends in my mind, sure, then you can say the friend zone exists. I actually heard it once in the form of a metaphor involving two ladders, and one is like the friend ladder and the other is a relationship ladder, and you can only be on one, and then once you're placed on the friendship ladder, you can't go back to a relationship ladder. I'm thinking back, I mean, yeah, that metaphor seems flawed, but then again, I think this is a myth. So I just think that the idea that perhaps you may do something that completely changes your chances of pursuing a relationship romantically with someone. Whereas without that little detail, you may have some sort of budding romance with that person. I think it really just undermines human intuition and chemistry and all the things that really go into the beginnings of a budding romance. I think personally at the heart of new romantic energy is a sense of attraction. Compatibility can play a role, but really human beings are pretty good at knowing who and what we're attracted to, and seldom is it, in my opinion, that somebody does a thing that just completely switches the way the other person sees them. I start sentences and I don't remember how the sentence actually started, so I wonder if my syntax is off, and I'm realizing this is a problem I've had the entire time on YouTube, but I took such a long time off from making videos that I forgot that I have this problem when I talk at length. So I apologize if my sentences are a little like, that wasn't entirely consistent with how you began that sentence. If so, that's what's going on. But of course, there are moments where we're dating and someone says or does a thing that makes us go, oh, red flag, or something like that. For example, say you're on a date with somebody. I understand in other cultures it's very different, but say you're in America on a date, you're American with a fellow American, and your date pays for the meal, but they fail to tip the server, or they tip something really low, especially despite getting good service. That, for some of us, may be a red flag. And a red flag is very different from being friend zoned. So there may be certain indicators that this person is not right for me. But when I think of the things that would be red flags that might turn me off from dating someone, those things generally turn me off from the person in general. Those things aren't necessarily going to put somebody in the friend zone. I think people tend to be nice to each other when breaking things off by saying, I'd like to be friends, but I think more often than not, that just means I would like to not date you anymore. And maybe that's where the whole myth of a friend zone came into play in the first place. Because at the end of the day, if you and I have an intense attraction to each other, if we have compatibility, if we have chemistry and all those things happen, and you say something that's a little off color or comes out wrong or may have been a mistake or whatever, I feel like people are pretty forgiving of those things if the energy continues to be there. I can't think of a time that there was a person I was just genuinely attracted to and into, and then they just said something that made me go, oh, okay, I'm gonna put them here in the friend zone. Like, that's never happened. If I'm attracted to you, I'm attracted to you, and I'm probably gonna ride that out until it fizzles out, it turns into a blooming romance, or enough red flags present themselves that I have to just cut myself off, you know? Basically, give yourself and people in general more credit than this oversimplified thinking, this like robotic thinking that we just file people away as a potential romantic partner or friend based on things that you may or may not do over the course of a date. It's just what creates romance is this very elusive and intangible thing that is either there or it's not. And it has nothing to do with a friend zone. If you feel like you are in the friend zone, I would say that it's one of two options. A, you always seemed like just a friend to this person, or perhaps that person was interested in exploring things with you but never felt that spark of chemistry, and pretty much from the start you seemed like a good candidate for a friend, or perhaps your relationship started off as friendship and just hasn't bloomed into something more because you just aren't candidates for romance, which is fine. It's totally fine. It's good to know where you stand so that you can move on and pursue people with whom you're compatible in terms of romance. Or B, like I said, what I think happens a little too often is that we say, let's be friends, when truly we just want to stop dating a person because we don't find that chemistry to be there. And really quick, I want to explore just a couple of other options just because these things are complicated. So I would say C, there's the scenario in which you are friends with someone and then you start to see each other as more. It's like a spark ignites and you become more. Or conversely, there are times where romantic partners become just friends and legitimately only see each other as friends because that spark has gone. At the end of the day, despite all the different possibilities, the key is the presence of attraction and not so much of a choice based on something frivolous. Myth number 2, persistence gets the girl. And I can generalize this and give this title, persistence gets the person. Don't get me wrong, this can happen across all genders, but I do find this to be something that has been hammered into the minds of heterosexual men when it comes to pursuing women. And I do think the movies play a big role in this because every single coming of age film or even romantic comedy kind of has this idea that if you just continue with the gestures and being there for the girl and being a nice guy, like she'll eventually understand that you were the one all along and she'll come around to dating you. And this is one of the things that I hate the most in terms of misinformation or just misunderstandings about dating. And in fact, this one for me, in my opinion, it lends its hand to behavior that is really uncomfortable, creepy, disrespectful, etc.
All right, well, you leave me no other choice then. Oh my God! What are you doing?
Oh, wait, that's the ball.
I'm gonna ask you one more time. Will you? Or will you not go out with me? God damn, my hand's slipping.
They're trying to buy you, idiot!
Not until she agrees.
Oh, go out with him, honey.
Okay, fine. I'll go out with you.
But don't do me any favors.
No, I want to.
You want?
Yes!
Say it.
I want to go out with you.
Say it again.
I want to go out with you.
All right. We'll go out.
In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if this were like a basic tenet in the incel handbook, to be honest with you. Not to say that if you've ever believed this, you are an incel. I'm just saying that this is one to be really careful with. Going back to what I said before, people generally know who they are and are not attracted to. It doesn't take long to figure out whether or not you have chemistry with someone. And while I'm sure some people have had relationships that developed over time, I'm not saying that this has never happened where someone was not interested in the other person at first and then over time it happened. I know that that's happened, but in general, most of us know whether or not we're attracted to another person pretty early on in getting to know them. So when we do find somebody who is continuing to push and push and push in hopes of quote unquote winning us over romantically, it can really make things uncomfortable for everybody involved. I'm sure that it can cause some sort of burnout and frustration on the part of the person who is pursuing, and then the pursuee feels an intense amount of pressure and oftentimes discomfort, and it kind of puts the other person in the position of having to like put the brakes on for the pursuer. I've been in this situation before where I felt like I had to put the brakes on for the other person because they didn't seem to be picking up on the fact that their advances were not working. And that experience of having to be the one to put a halt to things for another person, it's uncomfortable at best and feels a bit dangerous at worst. Because with people who are persistent in a certain way, or just people who can be sensitive or volatile. You never know how people are going to respond when you have to tell them to pump the brakes. At the end of the day, with both of these, what I have deemed myths, I think the underlying message, the takeaway is to let things happen naturally and to allow yourself and the other person to come to a natural conclusion that you feel a sense of chemistry, compatibility, attraction, etc. Most of the time, there is not any amount of work you can do to change somebody's mind in this arena. That's just the reality of most situations. So again, if you're having to put in a lot of work and the other person doesn't seem to be quote unquote coming around, move on. Put that energy towards someone who does welcome your advances. Ow, this hurts so much. Tendonitis. This hurts to do. Number 3. An ended relationship is a failure. I've heard this a number of times. That relationship ended, so obviously that's a failure, or I can't speak to dating advice because my relationship ended or whatever. But I have heard people say like, oh, who is so-and-so to give advice? And we are going to talk a little bit about advice giving. Or people reaching a certain age and feeling like they themselves are failures in the department of love and romance because a relationship has ended. This may sound corny. I don't care. Every relationship, especially as we kind of go through life and go through phases and changes and stages of life where hopefully we are growing as people, we are constantly evolving, or should be, and thus certain people are going to fit us at certain times in our life. Look at your friendships. You're probably closer to somebody right now than you were, say, 10 years ago. And the relationships and the connections that you have kind of just, they morph, they evolve, you grow closer to people, you drift apart from people, you may revisit people. And I think the same goes for the romantic relationships that we choose to embark on and sometimes choose to end at some point. I think of a successful relationship as one that fit your needs at that time in your life and vice versa. I have been in a handful of relationships, and there are some that I look back on where I think very fondly of the person. They were a great fit for me at the time in my life where we crossed paths. And for some of those people, I think that I needed them at that time in my life in order to get from point A to point B. And in that regard, of course, those relationships are successes if they helped propel you forward to becoming the person you needed to become. At the same time, too, I don't think that fondly upon all of my exes, but at the same time, there's also something to be said, too, about the things that you learn in those relationships. I guess it's all to say that I don't think of really any relationship as a failure if you learned what you needed to learn from that experience. Again, sounds corny, sounds cheesy. I'm also somebody who believes things happen for a reason. So, of course, assess how compatible you think I am for you in terms of somebody offering advice and decide whether or not you want to continue watching this video. And if you do, maybe give it a thumbs up. This is a super quick reminder to like this video and subscribe to my channel if that's something you want to do. If that's not something you want to do, just don't. I'll shut up and start talking now. And so kind of related to that concept is, this hurts too, what I consider to be myth number 4. Single people can't give dating advice. This is ridiculous to me, but I did have a call with another YouTuber recently who is somebody who is fabulous at doing the very thing that I said I love to do. And I wish I could do it as well as she does. She is somebody who analyzes people and relationships, how people interact, what we need from people, what we get from people, what's good for us, what's not so good for us. And she told me that some creators like me and this person and that person are often told, you can't give dating advice, you're not in a relationship. And it was funny because I was saying, well, it all depends on who you ask. There are people who think I can't give dating advice. And she was like, well, you're in a long-term relationship. I'm like, yeah, but I'm not married. So it all depends on who you ask. Some people need to get their advice from somebody that has exactly what they're looking for. And if somebody's goal in life, or a goal in their life is to get married, and they see me as somebody who's just not taking that step right now, then I may not be the person that they want to look to for advice. But that doesn't mean that I can't give advice on dating and relationships. Obviously, I'm right here doing it. But on that same token, I would still take advice from a single person. Just like I would not take advice from every single person who is married or in a relationship. We've all seen dysfunctional relationships, people who are together, maybe even put on a good brave face for the rest of the world. Maybe they have a picture perfect life on social media, but behind closed doors are unhappy in their relationship. As unfortunate as it is, I think most of us have encountered people like that. And it's just a testament to how fickle this idea is of what makes you good at giving advice in these arenas. And I just don't think that it has much to do with whether or not you're in a relationship at this moment, because kind of also looking back at the idea that past relationships really can be fantastic, amazing, wonderful things if they teach you what they need to teach you in that moment. A single person who has had their fair share of relationships and dating experiences that they've learned from is somebody that I would rather listen to if they are somebody who's good at analyzing what happened. What did I get from this person? What did they get from me? What did they take from me? Which means something different from get. Basically, a person who is good at extrapolating the important life lessons from their relationships and the relationships of the people around them. Because we are creatures who talk. We are creatures who share our experiences, particularly with our friends, our family, the people closest to us. And we are people who are surrounded by relationships of all different kinds. We are not solely in a vacuum. Most of us are not. With just our one romantic partner, and that's the only relationship we know. We've been making relationships our entire existences, whether that be friendships, familial relationships, acquaintanceships, enemies. We are people who go through life experiencing countless relationships, and I think there are plenty of people who are single that experience and observe relationships and know how to analyze them and have thought about certain things that maybe you could use a different perspective on. So I would not hesitate to go to a single friend who I trust in this arena and ask their advice on whatever it is I'm going through. Sometimes you just need a third party to bounce ideas off of. I'm much more interested in a person's mind than their relationship status when it comes to determining whether or not I would listen to what they have to say. I will keep in mind too, though, the point that I made earlier about looking to the people who have what you want. So there are times where I want advice, and so I will look to someone who's got a relationship that I really look up to. My mom, as an example. She and my stepdad seem to have a really good partnership, a relationship that works, a relationship that's loving, a relationship that's caring, and one that's fun. So there are times that I think that I really should consult somebody like my mom. And there are other times too that I receive advice and maybe I don't love it or it's not working from me and I have to consider the source. And perhaps while the advice might be well-intended, it might be astute, it may be good in so many different ways, it might not fit the situation for a number of reasons. It could be that perhaps because that friend is single, or maybe just because they're not in your specific relationship. There are a lot of different reasons that good advice might still fall flat or may not work perfectly in your situation, and you really just have to consider all of these things. And at the end of the day, I keep going back to this idea of like intuitively knowing things. You kind of have to just trust your gut on that one. And again, give people a little more credit than we're giving them here in these like silly little myths. And lastly, number 5, the beginning of the relationship is as good as it's going to get. Or another way I've heard it is, this is the best that they're ever going to treat you. And while I think that there is something to be said about new romantic energy, really the early stages of dating and romance where you're just infatuated with each other and it's really hard to see the other person's flaws because you are just flooded with all the feel-good chemicals. In a certain regard, it's really easy to be just the best versions of ourselves for these people because of how good we feel when we're around them, because of how hesitant we are to see anything wrong with them. And there's nothing wrong with experiencing that. I love new romantic romantic energy. I get excited for people that have it. I say, ride it out. You are meant to ride that boat for as long as it's sailing. But this notion that it doesn't get any better from there, I find to be disheartening. And I've heard this advice given in a couple of different situations. And I do think that it's important to note that if you are in a toxic relationship, one that is abusive or has abusive dynamics, no amount of advice is going to fix that relationship for you. So please know that when I give advice here, I am not referring to those types of relationships. But if you're just talking about imperfect people that go through rough patches and are maybe not treating each other with exactly what the other person needs at that moment in time, to say that it's never going to get better because the earlier on in the relationship is the best it's going to get, it really undermines, again, just like all of these myths do, really undermines our abilities as people and really our desire to grow. If I were to ask you, is this the best version of you that will ever exist in time? I would really hope, especially if you're somebody who's going to be spending any time around me, I would really hope that your hope is that you're going to continue getting better from here. I have encountered people who have early on in their lives said, no, I know everything I'm ever going to know. This is the best I'm ever going to be. And guess what? Those people are gone from my life and I do not want them back. But the people close to me, and as well as me myself, we are people who want to keep getting better, want to keep growing and becoming better versions of ourselves well into our 30s, 40s, and beyond. And if you can want that for yourself, it's not that hard to conceive of the idea of wanting that within a partnership. And so the relationships that I find to be the most successful, functional, respectable, whatever word you want to use here, are the relationships between two people where they constantly want to work on the relationship itself so that they can continue to be better partners to each other. I think for me, what I've learned and what I've picked up from the people that I take advice from, particularly my mom, it's all about viewing your relationship as a partnership. You know, any other kind of partnership, you would work towards common goals. A business partnership, that's the only partnership that came to the top of my mind. But just like a business partnership, you would want to work together to reach a common goal. Same thing with a romantic partnership. You work together to communicate what your goals are. You communicate what your strengths are. You communicate what your weaknesses are as a partnership, and you work towards bettering that. Because if you love each other and you love yourselves, you want what's best for the other person and you want what's best for yourself. So the idea that the beginning is as good as it's going to get, it's as good as they're going to treat you, I really hope that that is not true for your relationship. I really hope that the best of your relationship is when you're old and gray, or whenever the natural end of that relationship comes, whenever that has to be. Like I said, I don't believe that a relationship has to last forever in order for it to be successful, but in an ideal world where we are with our partners until the day we die, then I would like to think that my best days with my boyfriend are to come when we're old and gray. And that just makes sense in terms of how to get there. How to get there is by working on it. It's not necessarily just some stroke of luck that he is going to love me the same way he did as the first day we met, and that new romantic energy boat just kind of continued riding for decades and decades. Because I'm sure you already know that new romantic energy can only last, I think, something like up to 2 years. So I get where that concept comes from. I just don't like leaving it at that. It's also a way of giving people an easy out to actually improving upon themselves and their relationships. If you're with somebody who does not care to improve themselves or the relationship, then bye, you learned what you needed from this relationship, and it might be time to see yourself out. All right. I've been talking for a lot longer than I expected. I hope that you gleaned something from my advice that helped or kind of reinforced something that you already knew, perhaps. Feel free to leave me comments. Let me know what you agree with, what you disagree with. I hope you gave this video a thumbs up, but if it's bad advice, feel free to give it a thumbs down. the end of the day, engagement is engagement. Feel free to be honest with me about what you think. We all have obviously very different perspectives on dating and relationships in general, and I'm always interested to hear how other people look at relationships because I am constantly studying them. So I am totally open to you teaching me a thing or two. And to you, the one person who's watching who's not me, thank you for stopping by. Thank you for hanging out with me for this video, and you'll see me in the next one. Bye.